So here is a Journal for Learning Sciences webinar. So thanks for coming here on site. And I know that some other people may be coming here after they grab a coffee. And we would really appreciate having the opportunity to share with you about this research, particularly having our wonderful panelists to discuss this piece and connect it to the larger directions in the field. I look forward to our conversation. This is JiaBin Huang for the online audience. And here is my co-author, longtime collaborator, Mei-Hua Chen. We are from University of Albany, State University of New York. You want to say something?
Hi, I'm Mei-Hua Chen. I'm in the computer science department. I manage both Ideas That Matter and Knowledge Forum.
I'll give you a very brief highlight of this paper. It's a long paper, it's complicated. We will try to just highlight the key idea here, and then we have a discussion about any part you feel interested in. So this research is, we're trying to deal with the challenge of how long-term student-driven inquiry can be socially organized and supported over time. As we provide support and guidance structure for students to do inquiry and collaboration, we need to encourage and embrace student agency over the dynamic process. So how can we deal with these two competing needs? This challenge is especially important for knowledge building pedagogy that use a principle-based design, but I would say it's also important for other CSCL programs as well. So in the learning environment that doesn't require or doesn't rely so much on predefined learning tasks and procedures, students need to take on collective responsibility for charting the course of inquiry over time. And teachers often find it very challenging. So how do I get started? And how do I implement it in the classroom without the pre-set up the tasks and procedures? So in this research, we integrate theory design, theory development, technology design, and design-based research in the classroom, try to tackle this challenge. For theory building, we develop a framework called reflective structuration. This is based on years of work analyzing productive knowledge building communities. We look at how productive knowledge building communities operate, really. And we found that they're productive, particularly because there are all kinds of support structures that are guiding student participation over time. But interestingly, most of the support structures are not predefined by the teacher, but the co-developed, co-constructed over time with their teacher, but mostly by the student. So this represents a change from a focus on pre-designed structure to co-constructed structure to guide student participation in a collective setting. The co-constructed structures offer shared interpretative frames and artifacts about what the community needs to research, how research should be pursued, who will be doing what in connection with who, in what area, and why things should operate in this way, as justified based on the knowledge building principles and understanding of what it means to be a knowledge builder. So, for example, in a human body unit that lasts several months, the student will work on their interest in the first phase. So they bring all kinds of questions about the human body system and do hands-on and do reading. As the information accumulate, questions start to connect. They have a metacognitive conversation about what are we trying to research. So they identify so-called juicy topics or wandering areas as their focus for the next few months. So this set of juicy topics were mapped out on a chart paper that represent their collective goals, hanging on the wall in the classroom. So it's a social artifact helping the whole community to maintain its focus and coordinate their work. Students post the little post-it note on the big chart paper to say, I'm interested here, this is what I'm working on, this is my question. And the whole chart paper become an organizer for the classroom-based knowledge practice, as well as their online discourse space. So we see that this set of structure really social, guiding the ongoing work without the teacher telling them what to do on an everyday basis. So when we think of the pre-designed structure, like a preset of a project task, and other kind of procedure as pre-planned path in a public space like this one. But then in every public space, we often see the so-called desire lines. As the people move around in the park, their emergent desire lines form naturally because of people's participation. And this represents the co-design structure through participation. Previously, designers would try to prevent the emergence of desire lines because they ruin the landscape. And but most recent work in the design field is try to work with design lines instead of to avoid it. So in largely open space like this, the designer would allow the participant to walk around in the space and wait for the desire line to emerge, the little passes. And then they would pave the landscape accordingly. So the path will emerge, will be paved, but it's based on the people's participation in the space. So this represents a emergent design approach. So can we support this kind of a design in a learning space, in a collective setting, like knowledge building community? We designed technologies platform called Idea Thread Mapper that interoperate with knowledge forum to try to bring emergent structures out of a messy interaction, and then feed back to the process to guide their participation over time. In collective space like this knowledge forum or other linear discourse space, it's actually very hard to see emergent structure in terms of who are posting what, in what direction, and in connection with whom. So with all the distributed discourse, it's very hard to see the structures emerging. So what ITM provide on top of this layer of discourse is a meta layer for emergent structures. Looking at all the posts, like hundreds of posts in a shared discourse space, students will look at what are the juicy topics or wandering areas that are emerging from our work. And ITM will organize the big wandering areas using this visual map. And they can, over time, when the new area emerges, they can click and add a new area to highlight the shared focus for the whole community. And then the online post related to each wandering area, juicy question, are plotted on a timeline. So we can see clearly how the conversation are progressing from the beginning of September all the way to November, and how things are evolving in a particular area. This is make the structure more transparent. And as a high-level reflection, students composed in groups of what we call journey of thinking, Supernote. So basically look at a whole set of notes addressing a shared problem, and look at what are we trying to researching our problem, big idea learned so far, and what we need to do more in terms of the next step of our research. This high-level synthesis of a Supernote are shared with other classrooms, so the classroom working on similar curriculum area can see what other classrooms are working on, what they have learned. And at the whole bird eye view of a knowledge building initiative covering all the different related topics. For example, this is about electricity. You see that magnet was one of the bottom one. And we see that several lines of inquiry are progressing over time, and each color stripes represent a line of work in the collective space. And this visualization helps the community to look at what's going on in the community, what are pursuing or making progress, and where do we need to really invest our time. So using ITM, we conducted design-based research in a set of classrooms. In this paper, we presented a brief 5 and 6 inquiry of electricity over 12 weeks. One classroom, both classrooms use knowledge forum, and one classroom use a combination of knowledge forum with ITM to support ongoing reflection and structuration in the classroom to reorganize their discourse over time. Just brief highlight of the result. So classroom A use ITM to engage in systematic reflection on their wandering areas and progress, and B, no such reflection. We see that ITM reflection led to deeper discourse, coded based on the discourse moves, and led to more connected discourse, look at how the conversation about different topics are actually connected with each other. And then also led to deeper understanding individually. This is based on student portfolio summary of what they have learned. So classroom may have a more advanced understanding of electricity built through the process. So as a highlight of the takeaway message, we see that co-constructing shared inquiry structure over time is key to sustaining student-driven dynamic knowledge building practices. And what's special here for this way of guiding and supporting collective knowledge building is a temporal process of scaffolding. So work with the teacher's initial input, some initial structure that can begin with, and over time, the student would work together to build collective structure as an indicator of their high-level agency to chart the process of inquiry. ITM helped to capture and visualize the emergent structures and then feed the structure back to the process to guide the collective participation and interaction and sustain and connect the inquiry over time. We are looking at a next phase of connecting the Supernote, the inquiry areas, across different classrooms. So the different classroom can have a virtual visit to other classroom, look at what are your wandering areas and how my own areas overlap with yours so that we can have a super talk across the classroom. So I will stop here. Maybe I use a little bit more time.
Yes, hello. This is Keith Sawyer, and I'm delighted to be here participating in this webinar. I have discussed these topics with the authors for quite some time, I'd say maybe even several years, and the topics are very much of interest to my own research and my own theoretical perspective. So I was delighted to see the article get published, and I think it's a very important piece of work. In my own work, I've thought a lot about emergence. This concept of emergence is a central theoretical concept in this paper. And for me, and I think also for the authors, emergence is a social phenomenon where something emerges from a collaboration among individuals. So people are interacting, they're having conversations, or they're computer-mediated conversation. And those interactions result in a social phenomenon, which is not predictable from the beginning of the interaction, and you can't reduce its analysis to any one participant. All right, so something emerges from a true collaboration. It's not decided by one person, not one participant, right? If it's a true collaboration, then it's going to be a collaborative creation of everyone in the group. And so that's this notion for me of emergence or social emergence. And in my own research, I focused on extremely creative collaborative groups, in particular improvisational theater ensembles, where the actors on stage start a performance without knowing anything about what will happen, right? They actually are supposed to not know, because they believe that a better performance results if no one actor knows the outcome, or no one person is in charge of the flow of the encounter. So no one knows. The performance unfolds in an emergent fashion, right? It emerges from the collective actions of the individual participants. And that's part of what defines improvisation. And in social improvisation, we see this a lot. It's not just in improvisational theater, it's everyday conversation. It's any sort of collaborative interaction where no one person is in charge and where there's not a script or structure determined in advance. So a lot of our social lives are socially emergent, especially in this sense that we're both talking about here, the authors of the paper and me, we're both talking about microsociology, right? The emergence within small groups of collective phenomena that are, let's say, localized to that group, as opposed to a kind of social emergence, which is a macro social theory, where you might think about capitalism emerging from many individual optimization decisions in a market exchange economy. So that sort of thing isn't what we're talking about, although that concept of emergence is also used in the macro-sociological theory. And in the paper, the authors engage with some very influential social theorists who primarily work at this macro level, and in particular, Margaret Archer and Anthony Giddens. Giddens is the one who is associated with the term structuration. Structuration theory, very much an Anthony Giddens phenomena or term. Margaret Archer really to some extent being critical of Giddens' conception of structuration. But really all of them, all of these social theorists have identified the same critical issue, which is when people come together and you can't predict ahead of time what they're going to generate, how does something get generated? So I think this is, in the context of learning sciences, I think this is what happens in social constructivism, right? Any sort of constructivist learning environment, the participating learners don't know what they're going to learn before they learn it, right? And they can't know. They have to construct that understanding in the process of learning. And when it's a group, they are collectively constructing. This is, I think, the core insight going back to the 1980s with knowledge building and Cecil, right, and knowledge forum. This notion of collective knowledge construction. So in a sense, all collective knowledge instruction is socially emergent, right? It's has these characteristics of being improvised and unpredictable and jointly constructed by the participants. So I think that's what we're all studying in a way in the learning sciences. But before this paper, I don't think we've had really this particular theoretical way of thinking about social constructivism, this notion that group phenomena are emerging from individual participants' actions, and then those phenomena, once they've emerged, they at least have the potential to enhance the subsequent learning of the participants. And that's at least my understanding of the idea thread mapper, is it's designed to be a way of leveraging these emergent phenomena by representing them in computational artifacts or software. So I'll close with just 2 comments that I think might be good paths to pursue for future research. I feel like the paper, and I've already communicated with the authors, I feel like the paper emphasizes the bottom-up emergence from the interactional dynamics of the group. And I've done that myself in my own research. But as a result of this focus, there tends to be, I think, a little bit of neglect of what we might call top-down structuring structures, characteristics. So anything that a teacher does, or any curriculum, project structure, scaffolding, all these things that are decided in advance, let's call them scaffolding, those things we could conceive of as top-down structures. And I think this is a challenge of constructivist teaching and learning, is how do you do that, right? How do you maintain the necessity of social constructivism while also guiding it in some way with these scaffolds, but guiding it in a way that you don't crush the learning potential of this emergent social phenomenon. So that's something I think we could explore moving forward, is what are the optimal project designs or structures or scaffolds that would be most likely to foster this kind of emergence in a way that makes it more likely to be successful learning for the participants. And so that's one, is what's the nature of the curriculum, we could call it. And then another issue that I think is true for all learning sciences is what does the adult do? What does the teacher do, or what should the teacher be doing if this emergent collective phenomenon is going on in a classroom? And it's great, it's going really well, the students are constructing important knowledge, but sometimes the students don't construct. They go down the wrong path, or they're being destructive, or they're falling in some dead-end path. So then there's a challenge of how can a teacher, or how should a teacher subtly guide this emergent process so that it's most likely to be effective, an effective pedagogy. So it's a wonderful paper. I think it's just raised so many great issues, and I hope we all keep talking about it long after this webinar. Thank you.
So I'm so thankful for this opportunity to comment on this paper, because I really, when it came out, I just read it and loved it. I thought it was a really beautiful piece of work. And now I get a chance to actually articulate with others why I think it's such a nice piece of work. One thing that might be helpful to know is that I've actually been in the knowledge building community since roughly 1990, 91. So that's going on 30 years. So I've seen a lot of different pieces of work and push within the community to really take these ideas into exciting places. And I think that as far as within the knowledge building community, I think Jianwei has done just that. I think there's just such exciting ideas around getting kids to explore and grapple with really interesting ideas. And the power of the paper for me really lies in these understanding more the social mechanisms of learning and really trying to understand more the emergent co-construction of these shared inquiry structures, and how they enable this collective cognitive responsibility, which is a term that's been in the knowledge building community and something that's really critical, but I think really having a point-attable example, something that where we really see the power of this in learning is important. And the type of collective investigation that we see really detailed in this paper from different facets. So I think that's a very exciting piece. Beyond just the knowledge building community, I think for education, the thing that really excites me about this work is that it really puts forward a strengths-based approach. And too often we have a really deficit-based view of students, what they're able to do, this idea that focusing so much on teaching, that there's so much for kids to learn. They don't do this, they don't do that. And I really feel like this underscores learning and really seeing the power and the strengths that children bring to the learning context. At AERA this year, Barbara Rogoff showed these lovely videos of Mexican origin students who are highly competent at collaboration. And she was showing the strengths that these students brought and talking about I guess one of the audience members asked her about, well, how about scaffolding students through role-taking approaches where we come in and we jigsaw, or we do this, or we assign roles. And Barbara Rogoff was talking about the problem of such an approach is it might force these highly competent students in collaboration into a structure that really impedes their collaboration rather than foster collaboration, which is what the support or scaffold is intended to do. And I think that that's the power of this work, is really saying the scaffolding that we come in with pre-structured is meant to support students. And what it might do is both impede students who have different approaches that can be very powerful approaches, and also mask the strengths that students bring to the situation. And so I think that we need to be really cautious so that these pre-structured approaches don't mask the strengths, and that we come to understand what students are able to do. And so I think this is a really nice example of providing a way of thinking about the structures that students themselves can co-construct, and through that, as well as a technology-based tool that really supports students in visualizing and talking about their learning in powerful ways and sharing that with others. And so to me, it's really a way of supporting that strengths-based approach to education. The other strength that or the other community I think that this paper really contributes to is the community of the learning sciences itself, and particularly having this as a paper of JLS that is recognized, I think is really important. I think that one of the central pieces of most of the work in the learning sciences really centers around the idea of design-based research. And I think that this is just a wonderful model of design-based research. And the paper itself, I think, is also a lovely model of writing up design-based research. I think the way of really spending time walking the reader through the theory and the technology design, and understanding more kind of how this reflective structuration framework has been developed from years of research, and careful analysis of the ways that students are working with things and building that framework, and then carrying out these design-based research studies which inform the theory, which inform the design, is really what I think the originators of this methodology really envisioned. I wanted to end with a couple just questions of curiosity. And one of them is the analogy of desire paths. So one thing that strikes me within the idea of desire paths is they get formed when people are going toward their destination, but also sometimes when they're following the crowd, because there is a path that's been taken before and they're kind of strengthening this path. And similarly with the ITM, that students are pulling these ideas and saying, here's these idea threads, and there's this sense of the crowd is kind of crowding around this. So like this is what's emerging from the crowd, but what about the innovators? What about someone who is taking a path either, and again, this is moving away from the analogy, like in the knowledge building, they're taking this path and it might not be picked up as one of our idea threads, but it might indeed be a very powerful knowledge move or area of investigation. So I guess that's just a question of curiosity. And then the other question is a development question. You know, there's a figure in the paper, I think it's figure 3, that shows the interconnectedness of the different inquiry topics, and yet it seems to me that ITM kind of separates the threads. And so I'm interested in that interplay, and wondering whether there's plans to kind of include that in some future development of the idea thread mapper, the idea of connections that exist between threads, but also, you know, idea thread mapper is a lovely way to look at the meta discourse, but there's lots of ways to engage in meta discourse on the emerging knowledge building. So just any highlights of other possible tools for meta discourse and engaging kids in these powerful discussions. But thank you, it's really just a lovely piece of work, and I'm really honored that you asked me to give some comments on that. Thank you.
I thank Jianwei inviting me, and I share some similar point, but mostly the sentiment of what Kate has spoken. I love this paper. I do not know whether I've been as long as Kate in the KB community, but still a long time. And I have to say that I've seen a lot. So I'm very impressed with the kind of thinking, design, and progress that's made in this paper. And so I will say a few things. It is a very good, Karen Marlin wrote in a chapter about theory, pedagogy, technology integration, and I think that Jianwei's paper provide a really illuminating examples for knowledge building as well as learning sciences about how these three aspects can really come together. It addressed an important problem that knowledge building community people talk about, as in the introduction. How do students engage in the ever-deepening inquiry with epistemic agency? This echoes very much with what Marlene was talking yesterday about the 21st century competence and this whole area about design thinking. As far as the learning sciences community, I think that this problem is also very important and timely in the tension between, because I'm an old, long-time person here, is a long-time debate of Marlene Scott Amelia, even starting with Anne Brown, and then Janet Klotner, and about learning and knowledge building communities, as well as the tension between a more principle-based emergent approach versus more of a procedural and activity structure type of approach. And more recently, to brighter, I think some of you here at 2016 at Learning Sciences, the debate between scripting and this kind of emergent approach. So it is indeed a problem that needs to be addressed in the range of learning sciences environment that have been designed, ranging from more open emergent to more scripting type. So for our own community, we generally will say we accept this principle. We call ourselves doing principle-based approach. But at a deeper level, I would think that it is still a mystery to many people, as written in the paper. What does it mean by this principle-based approach? So I think that this paper is important in crafting out some kind of addressing this kind of design challenge. I'm not looking at taking the desire path, but I think of more of an analogy of many of the so-called inquiry-based approach, like a field trip with scripted posts. You walk from post A and then post B and post 3 and taking picture, versus the student really provided an opportunity to meander, to walk their own open space. So anyway, I described the background of the problem. So I see the contribution in this theory, pedagogy, and technology. The theory part is that sometimes knowledge building theory has been considered as too social cognitive. So I think that Jianwei's contribution in the paper is bringing us, and I admire his wide reading, bringing into sociological theories and reflective structuration idea about the more knowledge practice, the more so bring a possibility of enriching the knowledge building theory into more of the social cultural aspect. But at the same time, I recall the brighter paper that we read many years ago on bootstrapping, the idea about bootstrapping, but we are now doing collective bootstrapping. The important goal of education is how is it possible, how is it ever possible for people to move yourself up as a bootstrapping process, and now we are doing it collectively. How is it ever, is a philosophical question, but it's also a very important education question of us moving to a higher level of conceptualization and knowledge understanding. So at a deeper theory level, I think that it's a design piece, but it's also addressing these deeper theories of learning and Kate words about the social cognitive dynamic of learning. At the pedagogy level, I think it's been said, but going back to the earlier part about the tension and the polarizing thing about principle and procedure, I think Jianwei is actually working on some kind of what I call emergent or even some kind of intermediate structure. This kind of intermediate structure may support the student to continuously move up. So it's not like there's no structure. Maybe that's my interpretation. It's not like there's no structure, but this kind of structure is not predetermined by the teachers. These are structure created by the student, co-constructed by the student. Maybe this is a way of design to tackle the dilemma of this polarizing thing, and of course the technology. And then, but okay, how do you construct this intermediate structure? So we have the part about the technology, the ITM, which is a kind of way to providing the meta layer, opening up the knowledge building dialogical space. So you want knowledge building, but you need this kind of artifacts to help structure and to open up richer productive discourse and meta discourse that is needed. I don't know about my timing, but I just go on. And so then some of the implication I think for the community is that I think that many of us are actually having really interesting and nice structure in our classroom. We see historically knowledge building wall. Yesterday, I attended talk about the table of accomplishment target. I think all the talented teachers are creating many kind of some form of structure. But Janeway's paper might help us becoming a little bit more aware of what these things meant, what all these scaffold meant, using his reflective structuration approach and the emergent structure to help students to reflect on what has been accomplished in the community and yet looking forward. So maybe at a practical level, you can reflect upon what you have been doing in light of this theoretical and pedagogical design idea. But maybe linking to my own work, I think one of the very important things is not just the structure, but the reflective conversation that help students to co-construct. I will ask a few questions at the end. So just my thinking about how this continuation. I think that, or some of my, one of the things is also in Janeway's, well, maybe I'll start with this one. I think that major progress has been made in this kind of emergent structure supported by technology and learner analytics. However, I think the teacher role in this kind of environment still is paramount. How is it the teacher is still doing the kind of co-organizing, reflective, metacognitive type of conversation that enable this reflective structuration process? Is still something that we need to inquire. What kind? You have some lovely prompt in a paper you can read. So, but I think that this is one area. The other area is your own wonderful work about the opportunistic grouping. So a bit like what Kate said, with this identifying the juicy topic, but eventually the students are working on some different thread. Then you put them together. I think in the process, how do you move between not stuck in a group, but opportunistically moving together? And maybe Maywa's technology development, there may be way to helping that. I think that this moving between the group and the opportunistic and the community may be some area. I think this is our own conversation.
Actually, I want to echo what the three panelists before me has commented on the paper. And personally, I've gained so much reading the paper as well as learning from Janeway and Mei Hua. So maybe not to, one thing different from what I can talk about is I have actually also started introducing ITM to the Singapore teachers. And it is really interesting that the Singapore teachers, many of them are not too willing to use it in the classroom, but we are doing it in our teachers' community weekly meeting. So if we have a chance, we can share a little bit on that. But I think the way, when I read this paper and from interacting with Janeway and Mei Hua, the work that I do in school, really dealing with emergence, you get worried when you give them structure. You feel guilty when you give them a framework. And I have my teacher sitting here nodding also. But it gives a chance for us to structure the way that teachers can deal with the knowledge building principle. A lot of time when we work in the school, we do one-to-one reflection, we do a lot of meeting, and we spend a lot of time figuring out what to do next, where is the promising point. But if we have further developed this and we have this in our Singapore classroom, a lot of the one-to-one meeting and all that could actually be replaced by the teachers doing very meaningful and purposeful reflection on the students' idea. Because one of the teachers' competency that we focus in Singapore's knowledge building work is actually how teachers improvise according to the emerging learning, and how teachers actually work with deep pedagogical and content knowledge and improvise. And just now, the graphic on your desired path, that big picture. Teachers really need a big picture. And this, the way that the idea track mapper, when we introduce a journey of thinking to our teachers, everybody jump to it and say that, this is what we need, but, working with students is another layer. So I think this part, when we get teachers to systematically analyze students' note, and my teachers used to be saying that, okay, they read a note and they want to bring this to the classroom and pretend that, it encourage their students to read the note, they will shift it slightly to the right. But now we have a mechanism that allows it to happen more fluidly and quickly. So this thin balance that the teachers, knowledge building teachers, has to facilitate and instruct, I think the tool is extremely useful to make sense of their students' idea and to really move it forward. So when we do it in our weekly meeting, we get the teachers to read their view, and they do the journey of thinking. And we hope that the next step, the students will be doing it. So, and I think one of the things that I picked up from the paper, because as I work with teachers, I think the curriculum bit was very important, and I like it that you actually start from the topic in the curriculum, but you allow structure and artifact to be there. We talk a lot about conceptual artifact that allow the team to keep moving and move beyond curriculum. The thing is, you have to let teachers feel that, yes, they are kind of there navigating and designing. So the starting point and going beyond the curriculum, that part. And I think with this idea track mapper, the authentic connection across discipline can actually emerge. I mean, recently we have a project on history and history and music, and looking at heritage, and then we collaborated with Ontario Group and look at economics, and then we're thinking, where is that authentic inquiry? And I thought of your Supernote kind of concept that really may get us to that authentic connection in interdisciplinary work. So I just want to end off by saying that because we use it with our teachers now, as I move on, that question about what I think Carol and the previous panelists is alluding to is that, is there a way that we can jumpstart? Because it's still a very skillful way that the teachers has to navigate, look at it, and I had a good chance to be in the meeting in Albany when the teachers are talking about it. So what are the shared resource that we can really derive now that we have ITM to map out the emergence of the classroom? How do we allow another teachers to look at the emergence and learn from the emergence rather than say, what can I just take away and implement? So I think that would be the question when we talk. Now we don't have to develop pedagogical framework and stuff to tell them stage by stage, but now we can actually explain the emergence that is so precious in our knowledge building classroom. Yeah.
But yeah, it's the same. One of the same things I said in my spoken comments, that this tension, I think the tension between the guiding structure and then the improvisational emergence is really the core issue. I don't think there's a simple answer. I don't think there's a single answer. I think it's the challenge of effective teaching and of effective learning environment design, is how do you balance both are necessary, right? You have to have collaborative emergence, you have to have improvisation, but you also have to have some guiding structure, and the right sort of guiding structure can make that collaborative emergence more effective. So we all agree with the basic theoretical frame, and then when it comes to application, then it gets, then it becomes more subtle and challenging. That's one reason I thought this paper was so impressive, because it's theoretically sophisticated, but then it dives down into a specific learning environment design, where those issues actually are dealt with in a real-world software application. So it's a demonstration of what I think every educator is going to have to do.
Can you jump in here? So I want to make I really appreciate all the comment. I know that this is a very challenging direction, that this work is, still it's several years into this cycle to be able to generate this Journal for Learning Sciences paper. But it's a lot of struggle, like Keith and several others commented. it's a complicated concept to navigate how emergent process of a principle-based design can work and making it a bit transparent, and then working with Meihua through the several versions of idea thread mapper. So this is how conceptually it works, and this is how exactly work on the technology and bring back to classroom life to work with teachers on the design. So it's a very it's a long journey that we have started, but definitely there are a lot of other things that we need to explore, like the curriculum, the teacher's role, and the balance between the big mass, the big group, and the individual unique thinkers, and who may be taking risk outside of the collective view. But eventually, they may bring it, some create important new directions back. So there's a balance between the collective shared focus and some unique focus that doesn't match with the collective boundary. So the process can be navigated, and it's having the realization. What we realize that in the classroom, students often realize that. So this is a big thread that we have been developing. But then there's a new thread, it's not necessarily not important, but just happened that no one has working on that yet. So one example of that is recently, just in one classroom, just no one talk about the bone. Everyone seemed to be interested in the brain because that's very sophisticated and mysterious. Then until one little girl who was finger skating and then had an injury, and then that created interest in that student for sure. How do we get a bone fracture, and then what happens when bones heal? So that suddenly changed a new thread of conversation into the bones and how bones grow and heal. So it's outside of the major other major areas. So that's an interesting kind of example of navigating all the related challenges. So I appreciate all the comments. Definitely we're going to have a lot to work on in the next step. I want to just briefly mention that, especially focusing on the teacher's role, we have another paper recently published in a special issue organized by Kate and Yutam here and Danny on the special issue on revisiting learning communities. So if anyone is interested in the teacher's role, that paper did make more effort on the collaboration process, especially the teacher's input. So this is a second piece that more aligned with this framework, but talking more about how the teachers navigate the process and work with the teacher to develop cycles of research as a model to guide the student participation. So that's in the Instructional Science August issue.
What is the most appropriate time to implement the idea? For instance, sometimes we want to try some ideas and a bit then after we work on the logical time. What is the most appropriate time? So, like the researcher and teacher, we need to know the stages that then we give ITM to our students. Or how can we let our students have the sense that they need something to, like the ITM, to help them to think with the and then the rate one thing we appropriate time, no matter for the teacher or students to start the ITM.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Recently, we use ITM across a set of classrooms. Some of it being a unit over a whole school year, and others are only 2 months or 3 months. So it depends on the full kind of a time available for a unit. So the teacher typically would have a sense where are we now and how much time do we have and how much we need to cover. That's almost like a key question about the curriculum. So the teacher have the curriculum in mind, but it's not sequencing it, just ask the student to go through topic by topic. But at least the teacher needs to have that overarching sense of how much time available and what are the things that need to be covered. And in terms of a particular timing for developing juicy topic areas, set of idea thread, and the teacher will look at the ongoing kind of work of student I think we are creating a timeline-based annotation of a few classroom examples, and we're going to share for this particular conference, we're going to present it tomorrow. So you're going to see over several months when a particular idea thread was set up and how the teacher facilitated that, and then later when they reorganize the whole wandering area, and then start to have a new area. And so we're going to have a timeline-based annotation of a few classroom examples that may give a concrete sense. But the general principle is that one side is what are in the classroom discourse conversation already. They're messy, open-ended conversation for a while, but start to feel like we are getting connected, not just all individual questions or individual ideas. And when they start to have a kind of sense of connection emerging, to really see emergence, then it's a good time to have a conversation about that. So how our ideas relate to one another? What are the good directions to pursue in this unit? So they will kind of cluster their interests around a few juicy topic areas and build a question of that. Several input about the brain, then they develop a overarching question. So how the brain control our body? So that will become a major direction to pursue in the next few weeks. So really, it's a kind of a very critical time to see: are there already information accumulating? Are the ideas start to kind of connect, and then can we have a meaningful conversation about our connection? So that's a little bit kind of artful for the teacher decision monitoring. Sometimes it's 2 weeks into the unit, they start to have this structure of a juicy topics field. Other time, it may be 4 months. But before that, they may have a smaller topics going on, the teacher's monitoring following through. But till at one point, the whole class can have a meaningful reflection on what are we researching. Yeah.
Nearing the end, I think the paper is very rich at suggesting a lot of potential future paths. So I thought I wanted to type one that just occurred to me. The link between conceptions of emergence and complex dynamical systems theory. And we have several learning sciences colleagues who have been writing about emergence, but in a very different way.
I have a question that I'm interested in, which is, I really liked Carol's point about the creation of the structures is quite important, but really the key piece being the reflective discourse. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see the structures supporting such reflective discourse, and just give perhaps the audience a sense of the nature of the kind of discourse that the students engage in.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is also related to our question you raised earlier about the interconnection between topic area and navigate more fluently or opportunistically. So let me talk about the classroom discourse, and then Mihua may share with you some technology design that may facilitate this.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's interesting, when student.
Do you want to share that?
Yes. Sure. So when student, let's say, let me share the screen here with. So it's interesting. On one side, when the students start to build their wandering areas like this, that's a critical opportunity for them to look at. The teacher will say, look at this, this node from view here. In about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we have 160 node posted there. So what are the big ideas we try to tackle, or try to understand in this unit? This is the electricity, or could be human body. And then they would look at, we talk about this, we talk about that, and then think of the things they mention actually is about a deeper concept together. Like one is talking about the lemon juice producing, electricity, and the other is talking about static electricity. But then behind it is what is electricity? It's like movement of electrons. So it's the conversation to generate the big juicy topics out of hundreds of posts itself is an interesting meta discourse.
Yeah.
What are the things we try to understand? And then, so this realization actually kind of the production of this realization itself is a process of discourse. They kind of collectively, decide what are the juicy directions. And the other is like some other opportunity is when they map out the conversation over time. So, okay, those are the areas we said we're going to, like a research, but are we doing it? Are we making progress? So the discourse are organized based on the juicy topics they have identified, and then each color stripe represents the, the area of contribution, like extending over time. So they're going to say, okay, we said we're going to do something about some of the area, but really we talk a lot about battery, and we talk a lot about like the voltage and charges, and then like a static electricity on an A note by 7 authors, and then it end at early November, and then no one revisited. At some point in the end, they actually kind of looking back. So static electricity are mostly hands-on stuff, and voltage and electrons are very abstract and conceptual. So in the later phase, you will see that there are quite some contribution in the more abstract area. But then when they look at the map, they see, okay, what about the static electricity? We haven't worked on that for quite a while. Does what we have, what we have learned about electrons and electrical charges help us to, we understand what is a static electricity? How is it different from other type of electricity? So they're going to using this as an opportunity to look at, are we making progress? How are the things are connected? Are there any the missing kind of connection that we are not reflected in the conversation, but actually when we see visually, we can see a sense. Maybe we should revisit some of the early conversations about that. So I think that there are a lot of it take teachers' skill again, not what we have planned, but when this is in the teacher's hand, in the student hand, they see this map. Oftentimes they kind of capture that kind of opportunity. But I feel like there are a lot of critical kind of opportunity that we can explore and co-design with the teachers to facilitate that.
It's an interest is the one about is the creation of this meta discourse. So it's like it's really so the structure, the tools. And I think you have some very good example in the paper, but I think that it is like this kind of online and offline, simply put. So how the teachers can co-organize this with the student to help them see the kind of pattern emerging in the whole community. Not just, I know like many teachers might just talk about some specific question on some specific topic, but it is to get them to see the whole community development. That firstly take the teacher's understanding that they need to do it, and also the kind of competent or understanding. So we call it reflective conversation, KP talk. But with ITM, it provides the opportunity to open up the conversation. In the past, we just talk. we just say, look at knowledge forum, and then what are you doing? But now, the artifact or the technology provide the opportunity to mediate, to support. So I think that's important.
Thank you. So Mei-Huai, want to say something?
Yeah.
Well, I would like to talk about the interconnectivity among the threads.
Yeah.
So we have 3 mechanisms. The first one is on an idea thread map. You can select a set of idea threads and see their relationship based on the time of idea improvement. And then we also show the common nodes among the threads. So you can see that one idea appear in one topic, also appear in another topic. And you can also build on the node in another thread. So that can see the connection. So that's the first mechanism. The second one, we also show the similarity among the threads. So based on what you already have, we can suggest what are other threads that are similar to your topic. And then that comes to the last mechanism, the super talk. So you can invite other project, or you can join to other project, and then to form a super community. And then you can create a super talk, a thread, and then allow them cross-community discussion. So that's another effort. Is a cross community. That's our recent development.
Recent development of ideas frame mapper to use the wandering area as a way to view into other classrooms. What are they doing?
Right.
And then maybe not share everything, but one particular area is really a common interest, and have a super talk across classroom for developing larger conversation.
Just a practical question. I know that teachers always, or people always ask the question from the role of teacher, and they always say, well, how do teachers assess these things, right? So I mean, I know you've used it very successfully, or you've had teachers who've used it very successfully in class. So how have they gone and thought about their whole assessment system, or perhaps not, but how have they, what recommendations or insights do you have about how that plays into the whole classroom?
So it's interesting, the ideas frame mapper, when we organize the student work into the different areas and follow through over time, that gives us like two kind of assessment. One is a collective assessment. So as a whole community, are we understanding the big ideas that we need to understand in the curriculum? So the kind of a collective mapping of the whole community's knowledge. The second is more individual. So the individual is more focusing on each of the areas. So we ask them to write the journey of thinking. Research question, used to think, now I understand, and deeper research I still need to do. So those are 4 scaffolds the student use to compose a journey of thinking reflection. So individually, each student, when they say, I used to think, now I understand, and there's still deeper research, a deeper question I have. So of course, this is at this point, it's still a little bit qualitative. But teachers can see that very quickly. So when you see, I used to think, now I understand, it's basically the same misconception. That's a problem. We can recognize that early on. And a lot of the time we see, I used to think, and now I understand. Like, I used to think the digestion is only about getting food into your stomach, and that's it. Now I realize that it's a full cycle. Not end in the stomach, but go through the whole body, even if go to your blood, connect with the circulation. So that's we see that we used to think is a very shallow view. Now I understand it's a much complicated system level view. We know the students are making progress in understanding the big topics. So that's basically kind of making student idea progress transparent to the teacher and to themselves. But later, we may actually, as a researcher, we design coding scheme for evaluating their used to think, now understand, and how they are changing in the quality. Is it getting more complicated? Is it getting more scientific? So we actually assign like a content-based coding of their ideas summarized in the journey of thinking. But later, if we have like automated analysis, that would be like even more helpful.
What were the last two? The first two where I used to think, now I understand. The last two of the scaffolding that you said?
The first one is my research topic and problem.
Oh, okay.
The second one is I used to think. Third one, I now understand. And the first one is I need deeper research. Yeah.
On a collective level, can that also feed into some sort of picture of how the community is developing in terms of their? I mean, I hear you're seeing the different topics and topics of changing, but maybe also a collective depth of understanding or something like that. A way to use it.
Yeah, we're testing, together with Meihua and her team, we're testing, the several kinds of analytics. For example, one type of automated content analysis of discourse is to look at how their collective conversation is changing, not just, my journey of thinking, but their discourse related to one area, let's say about static electricity. Is it how the ideas posted in the node in that area are changing in the nature over time of several months. So we can compare the last month of a discourse posted in that area and the first month. How they are changing in terms of, are they getting more scientific, or are they getting more complex? And then are there deeper questions asked, not only just sharing answers. So we are testing the automated analysis of discourse to help generate some kind of benchmark. But at this phase, it's still kind of early on. hopefully one day that will become more useful in the classroom.
We invite everyone to thank the authors and all the panelists' time and efforts to make this webinar possible. And we thank everyone to join us online and join the session on KBSI.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate, all this good conversation. We definitely continue.